I think that we have accepted to me, we've accepted the revolutionary ideal. Like we've accepted that culture is opposite. Let's say that true culture is oppositional. That
Mm.
the artist is an oppositional figure. That all culture is there to oppose. And the rock and roll, punk rock aesthetic, all of that is what we've accepted. And so we all understand the world. I mean, it's not recent. It's Marxism. It's even before Marx. This idea of this kind of radical dialectic. We've accepted the idea that the world works through opposition. And so because of that, what happens is people will flip. Like people can actually flip from one to the other. They don't even realize, but they still are always inhabiting this kind of oppositional mode. And especially, and democracy is part of that, creates that issue too, because you inevitably end up having two parties. And then it's in the US is like such a picture perfect image. It's like this country just split 50-50 right down the middle. It's almost like it's almost like a cosmic image where if you set up two opposites, well, that's what's going to happen. It's going to sit up in the middle and people are going to take one side and people are going to take the other. Even sometimes the sides aren't even coherent in themselves. Like if you look at the positions that all the Republicans hold, they're not actually totally coherent, and the Democrats are not totally coherent, but they just swallow one side and the other, and then it's just we have to fight. So I mean, it's a very dangerous. It's definitely a very dangerous way. The ancient way was dangerous too in a different way, because usually coherence would be on the inside and the opposition would be on the outside. So you have the Roman Empire, and if you're Roman, and if you're an actual Roman citizen, you're right in the center. And if you're kind of peripheral to the Roman citizens, then you're a little further out. And then, then you have people that are a little further out. And then finally you have the barbarians that we're fighting and that we're trying to fight off. And so the coherence sets itself up in a hierarchy, and the opposition happens towards the outside. And so that has a very dangerous aspect, because you end up dehumanizing those that are outside. But now with democracy and a kind of dialectical thinking, what we've ended up creating is the enemy within. It's like inside your thing, you set up an opposition. And so then your enemy is your neighbor. And so, man, it seems like that's a dangerous place to stand, especially if it ramps up. If it stays at the low level, just discussion, it's not a big deal. But as we're watching it ramp up, yeah, it's a frightening.
What I was wondering was if there's a way to imagine what else. Why not?
You mean
in real time right now?
Besides a king, David, or a queen? In the
Well,
sense, I joke, but I think that the idea of having characters or of having characters that transcend the political, I think that that's the key. So I say a king or a queen, yeah, it can be that, and it has been in the past. Not that that's not problematic, but it can be saints too. It can be holy people that stand above the fray. There was a time, for example, in the U.S. where someone like Billy Graham, for all the criticism that I could, I'm not a particular fan of Billy Graham, but someone like Billy Graham actually stood above politics. And he would meet with presidents on both sides, and he represented a kind of father figure for the nation. And everybody could agree that Billy Graham's a good guy, even if I don't agree with him. And so it feels like the current state, let's say, and maybe like in America, maybe one of the things that actually played that role for a little while was kind of entertainment. I think it's once again, it's a debased version, but you had these, let's say the talk show host of the Johnny Carson talk show host type, where he was speaking to everybody and everybody could tune in to Johnny Carson and could watch Johnny Carson, and there was no politics. There was no polarization in the talk show. It doesn't mean that people didn't have their polarized views, but it just wasn't there. And so now it's weird, because now even in entertainment, things have polarized really strongly in terms of mostly left on the left. But now we're seeing, with certain movements like alternative media and Comicsgate and all this stuff, we're seeing this other side, which is coming about and is getting, let's say, it's getting bigger. One of the places that the Romans tried to find, let's say, togetherness was in their entertainment. So, I mean, the circus, for all its horribleness, was a way, I mean, because also it was violent entertainment, just like our entertainment is violent, was a way for Romans to be together, right? It would to experience the same catharsis at the same time. And so it was, you know, as the Romans became less religious, you know, especially after Augustus, and things started kind of to fragment there at that time. It seems like the circus was a place for them to come together. But I think it's a fragile, you know, the idea of finding yourself in entertainment. It can last a little while, but I don't think it's strong enough.
The golden age is actually always the death knell of a civilization. That what has happened is that it's closed, it's optimized, it's become progressive, and its vitality is being exchanged for a hypertrophication of the things that it identifies as success. So it gets a whole lot of, you know, in this case, gold, but it actually is losing vitality, losing meaningfulness, losing connectedness, losing religion in the deep sense. And yeah, I think that's probably, there's a map in there, which is to say that almost at the moment, if you shifted, if the center of the way that your society is maintaining its integrity as a coherent culture is living in the domain of media, you're already dead.
Yeah, for sure.
The body may not hit the ground for a little while.
That's right.
Depending on how big you are and what's going on, but death has already set in.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Maybe that's one of the things that I struggle with in terms of Jordan and in terms of Brett and in terms of Brett Weinstein and all these people, is that maybe that's why also I'm the explicit Christian in this whole thing, is that I don't see how how this stacks up, you know, and I'm really struggling to see how it stacks up, because one of the things that, let's say, Jordan talks about is the individual. And I understand he says it, and he doesn't do it in a kind of individualist sense. He talks about taking responsibility, you know, taking responsibility for things and being an active agent in the world, fixing the things around you, your community and everything. But it still has to stack up. It has to stack up to a higher degree. It's like, if you do that, let's say you fix your family and you do that, then those families also have to come together. And then those families have to come together. It has to go up higher. It has to come together in a higher sense. And so that's why I'm always I try to invoke, let's say, the medieval village as an image of an actual village, of an actual town, which has a hierarchy in the very architecture of the town, where you have the highest point of the town is the church steeple. It's usually at the center of the town. The town gets built around this church. That's the place. That's it. Like, that's the highest point. That's what we all look towards. We know that that's what binds us together. And so we go there to be bound to experience a common identity. And then we go back into our homes and we reproduce that identity in our families. And then we reproduce that in ourselves. Now I'm going top down. I know everybody's trying to go bottom up. That's fine. I don't have a problem with the bottom up, but I also think it's important to something to describe it coming top down. So, and I think that what that ends up looking like, to a certain extent, is identity. You can't get away from it. And so the desire so it's like, how can we deal with that? How can we deal with the reality of identities as this stacks up and not ignore it, but then also not create the danger of the extreme, let's say, rigid identity that we saw in 20th century nationalism? And so, but there has to be, it has to stack up towards identities. You can't just be a bunch of individuals and then have the state, like, have just this anonymous, post-national state country, like Justin Trudeau said about Canada.
So
Canada is the first post-national country.
What do you mean when you say identity?
Well, it can be all kinds of identities. Clans, exactly, like religious identities, like saying I'm a Christian, saying I'm a Canadian, saying I'm a French Canadian, that I share a common history, a common a common identity with other people. All these identities, they are inevitable in how the world stacks up. And so I feel like no one, at least like in this IDW group, everybody wants to avoid identity because they're saying, you know, it has to, the sovereignty of the individual, everything, identity is dangerous. It's like, you can't, if it stacks up, you can't avoid it. So we need to find a balance. We need to talk about how we can find a way to balance these identities without, because that's what, let's say, like, that's the biggest criticism coming from the extreme right for people like Jordan Peterson. They're saying you're ignoring identity. You're pretending like it doesn't exist when it obviously, it's going to exist. It's going to happen, but then they go way too far and they're like, okay, so now we're going to be, what is it like, you know, it's like the white race and all these, to me, that's a bogus identity, but there are real identities in terms of cultural identities and all that. You know, I talked a little bit before about the problem the modern world has in terms of oppositional thinking, that we've set our reality in terms of opposition. And I think that once I realized that one of the problems is this oppositional attitude. And so once I kind of got that, I realized, okay, so I don't need to see my place in history as oppositional. I don't need to see myself as having to get rid of that which is before. Rather, I need to shine as much light as I can on that which was before. Make it bright, make it alive. And so to me, the solution, because we are all we all share a similar history. All the people here that are talking, we're all European descent. We're all, our ancestors were all, at least our ancestors were all Christians, probably not that far behind. And so, you know, maybe one generation, maybe maximum 2 generations behind. And so to me, the solution is to reconnect or to recohere, to remember. All of these things is what I want. And I want to, like I said, make that which we had as bright as possible so that it's alive today, so that it can carry us, so that it can give us a sense of place, a sense of a place in the continuity of time, a place in space, and a place in terms of our communities. And I know it's not easy because the fragmentation is so strong in our community, but I don't, in terms of the scaling up that I talked about before, that's the only thing I see. I see all the other types of movements, the kind of neo-religious movements and these kind of pseudo-religious or kind of quasi-religious movements. I see them as participating in the breakdown in terms of the higher. Maybe they can afford something in terms of individuals' own realization, but they're participating in the general breakdown. So that's my, you know, it's a tall, I know that it's not, it's maybe idealistic, but that is at least the road that I've kind of got myself on.